Hello everyone, hope you're doing well. It's time to have a look at the naval suggestions past the developers and also the helicopter ones for April of 2022. So let's get through them. We have some which are pretty cool to see, starting off with the HMS Hood, since obviously that vehicle just got a deadlock, so a little bit late, but better late than never. So we'll start off with the first vehicle, the HMS Hood, and go through its history, since it seems like with the Hood, the only thing that people know about it is it got one shot by the Bismarck, which is fair, because it's quite an iconic moment in naval history, but there is a little bit more to the ship than just that. The HMS Hood was one of the 4 planned Admiral-class battlecruisers ordered for construction by the Royal Navy towards the closing stages of the First World War. She is unquestionably the most famous Royal Navy warship since Victory, particularly from a British perspective, and will be the last ever battlecruiser to be built. Ultimately, her duties as a political pawn in maintaining Pax Britannica for almost 2 decades would deny the refits to make her both watertight and less vulnerable to plunging fire. The Hood was laid down in September of 1916 at John Brown & Co. and would miss any action in the First World War before eventually being commissioned in May of 1920. She was given pennant number 51 with a design created at a time of the greatest naval arms race in history. The strength of the hull came from 25 watertight sections, and her advanced boiler and turbines permitting the Hood to develop a third more power for the same weight than the Renown class completed a few years prior. Gunnery trials at Greenock in March of 1920 were deemed a success, and she was able to reach a touch over 32 knots on approximately 150,000 shp, displacing 46,680 long tons at deep load, armed with 8 15-inch guns in combination with her speed, made the Hood by some distance the most powerful capital ship in the world at the time of her commission. This performance, however, came at a cost. For a price of just over £6 million, she was almost twice that of the earlier Renown, with approximately 25% greater expense if materials would be factored in. Throughout the 1920s, the Hood was used as a sign of British naval might, so much so that she would even undertake a world cruiser at the end of 1923, visiting many of the Dominions in an attempt to encourage them to support their dependence on British sea power. She would be given a major refit lasting between the May of 1929 to March of 1931, in which HMS Tiger would resume duties as part of the 3-ship battlecruiser squadron. Here, Hood would see the repositioning or the removal of the current flying off platforms and the addition of 2 8-barreled 2-pounder pom-poms. The aircraft catapult added would be removed the following year, making Hood one of the few major warships in service with the Royal Navy with a lack of a scouting aircraft. She would also again resume duties in the 1930s, and on the outbreak of the Second World War would be assigned to the Home Fleet. Deemed too valuable a political asset to have wasted for the 2 or 3 years of major refit, would again take towards the end of the 1930s. The Hood was sailed into the Battle of the Denmark Strait with virtually the same armor protection as when commissioned, the best part of 2 decades prior. Her initial actions in the war would see her involvement in the Allied attack on Mers el-Kabir and the covering of troop convoys before sailing her final fateful mission in 1941. Attempting to break out and sortie into the Atlantic were the newly commissioned German ships, the Prinz Eugen and the battleship Bismarck. Initially, Holland had wanted to approach the pair off the port bow in an attempt to reduce the distance quickly and minimize the number of guns that could be brought to bear. However, through the early hours of the 24th of May, HMS Suffolk, then shadowing, had lost contact due to bad weather. When contact was regained, however, the convoy was some 35 miles distant, so this initial tactic would no longer be possible. Vice Admiral Holland, a veteran of the First World War, was acutely aware of the vulnerability his ship had to long-range plunging fire. British practice at the time and through experience of this conflict was to close the range and bring the enemy to bear at all costs, even in this instance if it now meant a significant risk. The Hood was to be fatally hit by a shell from one of Bismarck's 15-inch guns at a range of roughly 16,650 meters, which resulted in the explosion of the aft magazine, and she would rapidly sink within 3 minutes, with all but 3 of her 1,418 crew surviving. A true travesty when it came to the Royal Navy. The next one is for Japan and is the Fusō, which of course is a Fusō-class battleship. This was the battleship of the Japanese Navy, which was laid down at the naval shipyard in Kura on the 11th of March 1912 and launched on the 28th of March 1914. Entered the fleet on the 8th of November in 1915 and became the second battleship to bear the name Fusō. The first Fusō was one of the first ships of the Imperial Navy, and among the officers who received him was H. Togo. The new battleship Fusō was assigned to the Kure naval area, and in terms of the tactical organization of the fleet, it was assigned to the 1st Battle Group, 1st Battleship Division of the 1st Fleet. Although Japan took part in the First World War at this time, the ship passed tests and combat training in peacetime. The first long-distance voyage of the new battleship was a campaign in Chinese waters in April of 1917. In the second half of the year, work was carried out to modernize the fire control system, and after their completion, Fusō began a routine service. In late February, early March of 1918, Fusō made another trip to the Chinese coast with a call to the Portuguese colony of Macau. Until the end of the year, the battleship was engaged in combat training, both individually and as part of a formation. On the 1st of December 1918, it was taken to the reserve. The ship underwent a number of upgrades, including the installation of 5 80mm anti-aircraft guns. The reserve stay ended on the 1st of August 1919, and Fusō returned to the 1st Battleship Division. Combat training began, both individually and as part of the formation. The monotonous camping life was diversified by trips to the Chinese waters, and the most striking events of its life of the ship in 1920 was the trip to the Chinese coast to protect Japanese interests. In December of 1921, the Fusō was put into reserve to carry out modernization work once again, the most important of which was an increase in the elevation angle of the main battery guns, the installation of new rangefinders with a base of 8 meters instead of 4.5 meters, and at the beginning of 1923, Fusō was returned once again to the fleet. In September of 1923, the battleship's crew took part in rescue and recovery operations after the Great Tokyo earthquake, and the next year turned out to be calm, and there was no remarkable events in the life of the battleship, except for the change of commanders. At the end of March 1925, Fusō leaves for Chinese waters for a month, and in December, Junior Lieutenant Prince Takamatsu Nobuhito, brother of Emperor Hirohito, was assigned to the battleship. He will not serve for long on the ship and will return to the battleship as a lieutenant in 1933, and in the spring of 1926, another trip to Chinese waters took place, and from the 1st of December 1926 to the 1st of December 1927, the battleship was once again in the reserve. During this time, the anti-torpedo nets were removed on the ship, and an open command bridge was installed on the bow superstructure. In the spring of 1928, another big trip to Chinese waters took place, and from the 7th of April to the 12th of April, Fusō paid a visit to the British possession of Hong Kong. Upon its return, combat training and participation in large fleet maneuvers were happening, and then on the 1st of December 1928, it was once again put in reserve. At the beginning of 1930, the battleship Fusō was put into reserve for a major modernization this time. Work began on the 12th of April at the naval shipyard in Yokosuka. The main directions of the modernization were the following: installation of underwater mine protection attachments, complete replacement of the main power plant as well. On the 15th of May, Fusō was moved to an even deeper reserve, Category 3 reserve, and the 26th of September transferred to the shipyard of Kure for the second stage of modernization, during which the depth of the newly installed mine protection and the length of the ship's hull were increased. The shape of the bow superstructure was completely unchanged, installed new anti-aircraft weapons, twin 127mm guns and 13.2mm machine guns, and a new fire control system. The hull was rearranged in order to accommodate new ammunition cellars. And then, on the 12th of May 1933, work on the Fusō was completed. Tests began, which were very successful, and then combat training. In August to November 1933, went on a campaign to the Marshall Islands, at that time the mandate of Japan. Upon returning to the waters of Metropolis, Fusō was enlisted in the 1st Battleship Division of the 1st Fleet, where he remained until the September of 1934. From September of 34 to March 35, the ship was in reserve, in connection with the second stage of modernization, during which the length and shape of the aft hull were increased. Upon completion of work, the Fusō passed tests and a short course of combat training. In late March and early April, a short trip to Chinese waters took place, and from the 4th to the 7th of August, a trip to Amoy, and then a course of combat training. On the 1st of December 1936, the battleship was assigned to the Kure Naval Area and was used as a training ship. From the 26th of February 1937 to the 31st of March 1938, it was withdrawn to the reserve for a major modernization, during which they installed a new fire control system, new 25mm anti-aircraft guns, and reinforced the hull in the stern. Upon completion of the work, tests and combat training, only on the 15th of November 1938, the Fusō was enlisted once again in the 1st Battleship Division of the 1st Fleet. In March of 1939, a campaign was held in Chinese waters, this time with the implementation of combat missions. On the 15th of December, the ship was withdrawn to the reserve for the second stage of modernizations once again, during which new aircraft weapons were installed, the number of 25mm anti-aircraft guns was increased, and on the 10th of April 1941, the ship returned to the fleet, having previously passed tests and a course of combat training. The battleship Fusō was assigned to the 2nd Battleship Division of the 1st Fleet this time. And then, at this time, the Japanese Imperial Fleet was preparing for a big war. Shooting and exercises of various levels were carried out continuously. On the 7th of December 1941, the battleship met on the roadstead of one of the ports of the metropolis. The next day, on the 8th of December, he, as part of the formation, goes to sea to the Bonin Islands, and on the 13th of December arrives to the Hasirajima anchorage in the vicinity of Hiroshima. Almost the entire initial period of the war, the battleship was here, from time to time going out to the inland sea of Japanese maneuvers. From the 21st to the 25th of February 1942, Fusō was the factory wall in Kure, where work was carried out to replace the barrels of the main caliber guns, and a demagnetizer was installed. The battleship then returned to the Hasirajima raid. On the 18th of April, American B-25 bombers launched from a Hornet aircraft carrier, the CV-8, bombed Tokyo. Fusō and the squadron went to sea, trying to find the impudent Yankees, but was late. The American connection was already far away. On the 19th of April, the reconnaissance aircraft from the battleship discovered the Soviet merchant ship, the Angastroy, at the point of the coordinates, the zone where commercial shipping was prohibited, so the order to stop and wait for the approach was dropped from the plane warships. In August of 1942, the question of rebuilding the Fusō-class ships into an aircraft carrier battleship was discussed. Of course, the Japanese decided on this not because of a good life, but trying to somehow make up for the losses incurred in the Battle of Midway. Work on the Fusō was supposed to begin in August 1943, but the plan was soon abandoned. From the 3rd to the 5th of September, the battleship passed the current docking in Kure. Until the beginning of November, the ship was on the roadstead to Hasirajima, at times going to sea for exercises. On the 15th of November 1942, she was handed over to the Etojima Naval Academy for use as a training ship. And in December of 1942, an exercise was held in the inland sea of Japan, in which the battleships Yamato, Fusō, and Yamashiro, and the aircraft carrier Zukaku took part. On the 15th of January, 1943. The battleship was returned to the active fleet. The first half of the year, Fusō spent in the waters of the metropolis, not taking part in hostilities. On the 8th of June 1943, she was on the roadstead of Hasirajima, with the battleship Mutsu at the adjacent anchorage. Suddenly, there was an explosion, and this battleship quickly sank. The Fusō boats saved 353 people on all ships in the roadstead. A combat alert was broken, and a search for enemy submarines began, which was soon stopped. The battleship Fusō was used as a staff ship to rescue operations, and the M Commission to investigate the circumstances of the sinking of the Mutsu met in its salons. Only on the 25th of June, the service entered its usual rut. The 2nd Battleship Division went to sea for tactical exercises and firing. In early July, the ship arrives in Kure for minor repairs and reinforcement of armament. A Type 21 surface target detection radar and 21 25mm anti-aircraft machine guns, 2 paired, 17 single, were installed on board. Later, their number was increased to 37. From the 18th to the 25th of July, the ship was docking. The work was completed in early August. On the 15th of August, all those rescued from the Mutsu were transferred to the battleship Nagato. On the 16th of August, Fusō, accompanied by 2 destroyers, went to sea. On the 17th of August, arrived to Yashima, the Shikoku Island, which were a powerful formation of ships of the Imperial Navy was formed, which included the battleships Nagato and Yamato, the escort aircraft carrier Taiyo, heavy cruisers Atago and Takao, and 5 destroyers. Soon, they went to sea and headed for Truk, where they arrived on the 23rd of August. After the short rest, combat training began. In early September, Japanese intelligence learned that the Americans were planning a raid on Tarawa and other atolls. In this regard, the main forces of the Imperial fleet were transferred to the lagoon of the Enewetok Atoll. In order to avoid various surprises, the battleship Musashi, Fusō, Haruna, and Kongo were abandoned on Truk Atoll. On the 25th of September, the main forces of the Imperial Navy, which had not entered the battle, returned to the lagoon. Until February of 1944, Fusō was in Truka Lagoon, occasionally going out for sea exercises. Meanwhile, the military situation of the Empire continued to deteriorate. Truk ceased to be a safe base, and it was decided to withdraw the main forces of the fleet from there. On the 1st of February 1944, the battleships Fusō and Nagato, 3 heavy cruisers and 6 destroyers left the raid. At 10 o'clock in the morning, they were discovered by the American submarine the Permit, but was unable to launch the attack. On the 4th of February, the squadron arrived at Palau, but this base was also not safe. On the 16th of February, the unit goes to sea for transfer to the anchorage of Linga Roads in the vicinity of Singapore. The first 4 days of the crossing went smoothly, and on the 20th of February, the Japanese ships were discovered by the American submarine Puffer, but she was unable to launch the attack either. On the 21st of February, the fleet arrived at its destination, and on the 25th of February 1944, the 2nd Battleship Division of the 1st Fleet was disbanded, and on the same day, the 2nd Battleship Division of the United States Fleet, or the United Fleet, I should say, was formed from the same ships. Until April, Fusō was on the roadstead of Linga Roads, from time to time going to exercises as part of Admiral Ozawa's mobile fleet, and from the 13th to the 25th of April, she was docked in the former British naval base, Solitaire in Singapore. On the 30th of May 1944, the Fusō ship, 2 heavy cruisers and 5 destroyers set out to sea, providing long-range cover for the convoy's passage. On the 31st of May, the battleship and its entourage were spotted by the American submarine Garhead and Ray, but neither of them managed to take a position to attack. The first phase of the operation was completed with the arrival of Davao. The ships of the convoy were already there. On the 2nd of June at 10:30 p.m., the convoy sets out to sea, but in the morning of the 3rd of June, American B-24 Liberator aircraft discovered it. The American submarine Russia discovered a heavy cruiser detached from the battleship. The commander of the United Fleet, Admiral Toyoda, realizing that the element of surprise was lost, ordered an end to the operation. Fusō returns to Davao. During the transition, an order was received to demonstrate at Palau, but it was soon cancelled. On the 4th of October, the ships arrived without loss at Linga Road. Soon after the passage, Admiral Nishimura transferred the flag to the battleship Yamashiro. The anchorage was calm. Ships occasionally went out for exercises, Meanwhile, the development of Operation Show and Go, a decisive battle with the Americans, was coming to an end. Several options were developed, depending on the point of the American landing. From the 18th to the 20th of October, the battleship Fusō, as part of the fleet, moved to Brunei, where a full supply of fuel was taken on board. In early October, the Americans landed in the Philippines, which automatically put into effect a variant of the Japanese Plan SHO-1. Fusō, Yamashiro, heavy cruiser Mogami, and 4 destroyers go to sea. They were part of the C compound, which meant the South. According to the plan, several formations of heavy artillery ships were to break through to the American bridgehead. A decoy aircraft carrier squadron was formed to divert attention. On the 24th of October, Compound C was discovered by enemy aerial reconnaissance, and at 0918, the first American air raid began. It was attended by 26 aircraft from the aircraft carriers Enterprise and Franklin. The Fusō was hit by 1 bomb, which went through the upper deck and exploded in the cockpit, ignited aviation gasoline in a nearby storage facility. Soon, the fire reached a nearby plane, which burned out very quickly. The battleship broke down and reduced speed. By 10 o'clock, the fire was extinguished and took place in the warrant. Nishimura's compound continued to march toward the Sarigua Strait, although the Japanese command knew nothing about what was happening with the main forces of Admiral Kurita. Nishimura knew nothing about the plans and deployment of the fleet. Rear Admiral J.B. Oldendorf commanded American forces in the Surigao Strait. The battleships of Admiral Kincaid's 7th Fleet awaited Nishimura's arrival. Oldendorf had nearly set up his trap. He deployed 39 torpedo boats down the strait, creating the first defensive line between Bohol in the north and Camguin in the south. Then Formation C had to fight 28 destroyers located in line with the island of Dingat. The next defensive barrier was the line forces themselves, covered by heavy cruisers to the right and left. The battleships Mississippi, Maryland, West Virginia, Tennessee, California, and Pennsylvania were directly across the course of the Nishimura. In the evening, the ships of the C compound received a radiogram from Admiral Kurita that he would not be able to arrive at the rendezvous point in time, but this did not stop Nishimura, who continued to lead the compound entrusted to him to death. At about 2200 hours, the first contact with enemy torpedo boats occurred. On the 25th of October, 1944, at 00:15 p.m., the C formation entered the Surigao Straits. His build was as follows. The forward guard was the destroyer Michiso, followed by the destroyer Asagumo, followed by the battleships, in the wake of which the cruiser Mogami was going. The destroyers Yamagumo and Shigure were walking alongside the Mogami. At 1:25 a.m., another attack by American torpedo boats was repulsed. At 2:45 p.m., the operator of the destroyer McCowan's radar station detected a target mark at a distance of 15 miles. At this time, the C compound was repelling the attack of the torpedo boats. This did not prevent the signalman of the destroyer Ségur from detecting enemy ships. At 3 a.m., American destroyers fired a torpedo salvo, 27 torpedoes, and at 3 hours, 9 minutes, 1 or 2 torpedoes hit the battleship Fusō. An explosion or explosions thundered in the middle of the hull. The battleship went out of order and lay on the return course to the exit from the strait, sailing at speeds of 10 knots. Fires blazed on the ship. The destroyer Asagumo was another victim of this attack, and at 3:38 a.m., the fire reached the ammunition cellars of the C and D turrets. A strong explosion thundered, and the ship broke into 2 parts. At about 5 o'clock in the morning, the Americans began to clean up the strait, and at 05:29 hours from the flagship cruiser Louisville, Rear Admiral Oldendorf discovered a large stationary ship engulfed in flames. It was the bow of the battleship. Fire was opened on it with 203mm armor-piercing shells. The bow of the Fusō sank at 5 hours 35 minutes. The stern at about 7 a.m. without any impact from the enemy side. There were no rescues from the battleship. The Americans did not carry out the rescue operation, picking up only those who were in the path of their ships. The Japanese sailors who reached the coast were killed by the Filipinos. The battleship Fusō is unique in that it has 2 points of doom. So basically the bow is in a different area compared to the others. The main armor belt being a 305mm belt, which is quite nice, and then obviously having the 356mm main guns with 6 sets of dual-mounted ones. Maybe one day we'll see this thing, maybe soon. The Italians get another Trento-class heavy cruiser, and this is the Bolzano. It starts its story between the end of 1928 and the beginning of 1929. Studies were conducted for the construction of a new cruiser of the Trento type, improved on the basis of the directives made by a specific committee for the construction of the new units, chaired by the Under-Secretariat of the State of the Navy. According to these directives, without prejudice to the standard displacement of 10,000 tons, the speed of 36 knots, and the protection of the Trento. The new unit would have had the following characteristics: 203mm guns equal to those of the Zara class, with a reduction in the thickness of the armor towers, better watertight compartmentalization so as to allow good conditions of buoyancy and stability, with 3 contiguous flood compartments. As for protection, it was decided to adopt that of the Trento. The project for the construction of the new improved Trento cruiser was approved by the ship's project committee, and the unit was ordered on the 25th of October 1929 at the Ansaldo shipyard in Genoa, Sestri. Set on the 11th of June 1930, it entered service on the 19th of August 1933 with the name Bolzano. So very similar to what we would see before. It has 8 guns, basically 4 dual-mounted turrets of 203mm caliber, and also at the same time it would be pretty quick with a speed of 35 knots. Also a bunch of torpedo tubes and secondary weapons in the form of 1600mm guns, plus 4 40mm guns, 8 13.2mm, and also a catapult for some seaplanes. For helicopters, we have the TAI AgustaWestland T129 ATAK, which is a twin-engine, tandem-seat, multi-role, all-weather attack helicopter based on the Agusta A129 Mangusta platform. The T129 was developed by Turkish Aerospace Industries with a partnership with AgustaWestland. The helicopter is designed for advanced attack and reconnaissance missions in hot and high environments and rough geography in both day and night conditions. Turkey announced on the 30th of March 2007 that it had decided to negotiate with AgustaWestland for the attack program to co-develop and produce 51 with 40 options of attack helicopters based on the Agusta A129 Mangusta. Under the agreement, TAI developed an indigenous mission computer, avionics, weapon system, self-protection suites, and the helmet mounting queuing system, and the Tazas Engine Industries manufactures the CTS 804N engines from LHTEC under license. So basically, the T129 ATAK integrates indigenous avionics and weapon systems with upgraded engines, transmission, and rotor blades. It made its first flight on the 28th of September 2009, and in May of 2014, the first 9 of the T129 ATAKs have been entered into service in the Turkish Armed Forces, with 56 T129 ATAKs in service since then. It has a 20mm gun, a 3-barreled rotary cannon. It can also carry Hellfires, TOWs, Stingers, Sidewinders, FFAR rocket pods, and also some HMGs in the form of 12.7mm. And also it can carry some OMTAZs, and also some 70mm laser-guided rockets as well. So this thing would very much be a modernized version of the A129, which we already have in the game. That's all the stuff past the developers for naval and helicopters this month. I hope you all have a wonderful day, and I'll see you next time. I'd just like to thank Merciless Reaper, Jerry Provolt, Mega Dino King, Professor X1718, Orange Tail, Sakoshi Tiger, Teddy, John Ryman, Universe, Eugens Terry, Ambrosius McClellan, Daniel Stanton, Martinez, Moxie, B. Young, and Derek R., Barine, Lafouche, and Samuel Slick for supporting the channel.